It was Christmas night, 1996, when the world of the Ramsey family, and soon the entire nation, was shattered forever. JonBenet Ramsey, a 6-year-old beauty pageant star from Boulder, Colorado, vanished into the shadows of mystery and tragedy. By morning, the discovery of her lifeless body in the basement of her own home transformed what should have been a season of joy into one of the darkest crime stories America had ever witnessed. From the very first moment, nothing about this case was ordinary. A handwritten ransom note, a family mansion turned crime scene. Media helicopters circling above as investigators tried and often failed to preserve crucial evidence. And at the heart of it all, a grieving family accused of hiding secrets too terrible to imagine. Nearly 3 decades later, people are still asking, what really happened to JonBenet Ramsey? For years, the case has been tangled in accusations, dead ends, and endless speculation. But recently uncovered details and long-buried truths suggest that the mystery may finally have an answer. And it's far worse than anyone dared to think. The Ramsey home, a sprawling Boulder mansion decorated with twinkling Christmas lights, looked picture-perfect on December 25, 1996. Inside, the family celebrated the holiday with friends, laughter, and the joy of the season. JonBenet, dressed in festive attire, had spent the day in the warm glow of family life, unaware of the dark shadow that would soon fall across her world. That evening, John and Patsy Ramsey tucked their children into bed after returning from a holiday party. To the outside world, it seemed like any other Christmas night. But within hours, the unimaginable would unfold. In the early morning of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey discovered something chilling: a 3-page handwritten ransom note placed on the staircase. It demanded $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return, an oddly specific amount that mirrored John Ramsey's year-end bonus. The note was long, unusual, and filled with strange phrases that immediately baffled investigators. Unlike most ransom notes, this one seemed theatrical, almost as if it had been written inside the house. Panic surged through the Ramsey household. Patsy dialed 911, her voice shaking with terror, reporting her daughter's disappearance. Soon, the house was filled with police officers, family friends, and neighbors offering support. But what should have been a carefully protected crime scene quickly descended into chaos. People wandered through the home, touching doors, moving objects, and unknowingly contaminating vital evidence. Hours stretched into a blur of confusion. Officers searched room after room, finding no trace of JonBenet. Then, in the early afternoon, John Ramsey made a grim discovery in the basement. Behind a locked door, he found his daughter's body covered in a white blanket. The horror was now undeniable. The death of JonBenet Ramsey immediately captured national attention. News crews swarmed Boulder, broadcasting the tragedy into living rooms across America. To many, the case was more than just a crime. It was a nightmare that shattered the illusion of safety in suburban homes. Yet even in those first hours, suspicion began to cloud the grief. Why had the ransom note been so unusual? Why had law enforcement allowed so many people inside the house? And most disturbingly, why did investigators almost immediately begin to turn their gaze toward the family itself? JonBenet's Christmas night had ended in tragedy. But for the Ramseys, and for the world, this was only the beginning of a decades-long mystery filled with conflicting theories, unanswered questions, and shocking revelations. The hours following JonBenet's discovery were critical, but instead of clarity, confusion and mistakes piled up. From the start, the Boulder Police Department struggled with one of the most high-profile cases in American history. Their missteps would haunt the investigation for decades to come. The crime scene had already been compromised. Friends, neighbors, and even clergy had moved freely through the Ramsey home before investigators could properly secure it. By the time evidence teams arrived, fingerprints, footprints, and potential fibers had been contaminated beyond repair. Some officers later admitted that the scene had been so mishandled, it would be nearly impossible to build a case on hard forensic evidence alone. Attention quickly turned toward the family. Patsy Ramsey's emotional 911 call, while filled with fear, struck some as rehearsed. The ransom note, written on paper found inside the house, raised even more suspicion. Handwriting experts could not conclusively link it to Patsy, but similarities were undeniable. John's discovery of JonBenet's body further fueled speculation. Why had he gone straight to the basement? Why had he carried her upstairs, altering the crime scene further? The Ramseys, once a respected, affluent Boulder family, were suddenly at the center of a media storm. Reporters painted them as suspects before evidence had even been reviewed. Tabloids screamed with headlines accusing the parents of everything from negligence to outright murder. For many, the mystery was already solved. Someone inside the Ramsey home had been responsible. At the same time, law enforcement found itself split. The Boulder police leaned heavily toward the family theory, convinced the crime had to be an inside job. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office pushed back, suggesting that the evidence pointed toward an unknown intruder. This lack of unity created chaos. Instead of pursuing one clear line of investigation, the case splintered into factions, with each side undermining the other. Public opinion became another powerful force. The Ramseys hired attorneys and PR representatives determined to protect their image. They appeared in televised interviews, insisting on their innocence. But for many viewers, their composed demeanor came across as cold and calculated rather than grieving. Patsy, especially, was scrutinized for every word, every expression, every gesture. Within weeks, the tragedy of JonBenet's death had transformed into a full-blown media circus. Cable news ran continuous coverage. True crime writers speculated wildly. Talk shows debated endlessly whether the Ramseys were guilty. In the court of public opinion, the family was already convicted, even though no charges were filed. Amid the noise, crucial questions remained unanswered. Who had written the bizarre ransom note? Why did the amount requested match John's bonus so precisely? And how had someone been able to enter the Ramsey home on Christmas night without leaving behind definitive signs of forced entry? The case, once expected to be solved quickly, was already spiraling into one of the most controversial investigations in American history. And for the Ramseys, grief for their daughter was compounded by suspicion, scrutiny, and the unrelenting glare of the spotlight. As the investigation dragged on, the absence of clear evidence gave rise to countless theories, some grounded in logic, others born out of pure speculation. Each theory captured headlines, drawing in a public eager for answers, yet none ever led to definitive closure. The first and most controversial theory centered on the Ramseys themselves. Investigators argued that the ransom note's length, odd phrasing, and use of family stationery pointed to someone inside the house. Critics highlighted Patsy's handwriting similarities and the peculiar detail of the ransom sum matching John's bonus. The theory suggested that JonBenet's death may have been a tragic accident during a family dispute, later disguised as a kidnapping. While this idea dominated public perception for years, it was never backed by hard forensic proof. The second major theory involved JonBenet's 9-year-old brother, Burke. Some speculated that sibling rivalry or a moment of anger had spiraled out of control, with the parents covering it up to protect him. Burke's unusual behavior in later interviews only deepened suspicion for some, but there was never physical evidence connecting him to the crime. To this day, the theory remains one of the most controversial and debated aspects of the case. Then there was the intruder theory. Supporters pointed to a broken basement window and a mysterious boot print found near JonBenet's body. Some DNA samples recovered from her clothing did not match any family member, fueling the idea that an unknown person had entered the Ramsey home. Over time, several possible suspects emerged: local drifters, former employees, and even a convicted sex offender living nearby. Yet, every lead either collapsed under scrutiny or lacked the evidence necessary for prosecution. Theories became wilder as the years went on. Some claimed it was the work of a jealous pageant rival's parent. Others suggested a far-reaching conspiracy involving law enforcement or government officials. The lack of closure turned the case into fertile ground for speculation, documentaries, and endless online debates. But the deeper investigators dug, the more frustrating the dead ends became. DNA testing offered glimmers of hope but never matched a known suspect. The ransom note remained an enigma, too detailed for an intruder pressed for time, yet too elaborate to dismiss as the work of a panicked family member. Meanwhile, the Ramseys endured relentless public judgment. They faced grand jury proceedings in 1999, and while jurors reportedly voted to indict them on charges of child abuse resulting in death, the district attorney refused to pursue it, citing insufficient evidence. This decision only deepened the public's suspicions and prolonged the mystery. By the early 2000s, the case had reached a stalemate. With every theory weakened by contradictions and every lead ending in disappointment, the JonBenet Ramsey mystery became less about solving a crime and more about arguing over which explanation felt most believable. The truth seemed buried beneath decades of speculation, waiting for the day when science, persistence, or a hidden confession might finally bring it to light. For years, the JonBenet Ramsey case seemed frozen in time, an unsolved mystery overshadowed by speculation and tainted by investigative missteps. But as technology advanced and new eyes revisited the evidence, revelations began to emerge that painted a darker, more unsettling picture than anyone expected. One breakthrough came with the evolution of DNA testing. Early samples taken from JonBenet's clothing had been inconclusive, but later reanalysis using more sophisticated methods revealed unidentified male DNA. This strongly supported the intruder theory, suggesting someone outside the family may have been involved. Yet even as this evidence appeared to clear the Ramseys, it left investigators with a haunting reality. The real perpetrator might have slipped away unnoticed for decades. In 2006, a bizarre twist briefly reignited hope for resolution. A former schoolteacher named John Mark Carr confessed to JonBenet's murder, providing lurid details that captured headlines worldwide. But as investigators dug deeper, his story unraveled. His DNA did not match the evidence, and his confession appeared to be a disturbing fantasy rather than truth. The case returned to square one, more tangled than ever. Years later, documentaries, books, and investigative journalists revisited the case, uncovering new inconsistencies. Some highlighted the ransom note as the most damning piece of evidence, crafted with chilling precision and filled with cinematic references. Others pointed to overlooked suspects in Boulder's own backyard, individuals with criminal histories who had been dismissed early on. Each revelation hinted at a conspiracy of negligence, if not something worse, that the truth was known but ignored. Perhaps most shocking were reports that surfaced in recent years about how evidence was handled. Former law enforcement insiders admitted that egos, rivalries, and public pressure had derailed the investigation. The Boulder police and the district attorney's office had been locked in a power struggle, each more concerned with public image than with collaboration. In the process, critical opportunities to solve the case were lost forever. For Shirley Jones, or any celebrity case we've discussed, the truth often lies in nuance. For JonBenet's tragedy, the nuance is unbearable. The final conclusion many experts now share is chilling. This case may never be solved because it was mishandled from the very beginning. The DNA evidence, though pointing toward an intruder, is incomplete. The ransom note remains a puzzle that defies clear explanation. And the possibility that key evidence was destroyed or overlooked means that even if the killer's identity is known, the case may not hold up in court. What makes the solution worse than anyone imagined is not just the possibility that a stranger entered the Ramsey home undetected. It's the realization that justice for JonBenet may have been within reach, only to be lost due to human error, pride, and incompetence. Nearly 3 decades later, the little girl whose face once lit up pageant stages remains frozen in time, her story unresolved, her legacy one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. The terrifying truth is not just who may have killed JonBenet Ramsey, it's that we may never know for certain. And in that uncertainty lies the true horror. A child's voice silenced, a family's life destroyed, and a mystery that continues to haunt us all.